Welcome, everyone. I hope everybody's week is going good so far. It's going quickly for me. It's like, oh, moving fast. Still have some folks joining, so continue to let them in. All right, I think the timing is good. It looks like the people joining us slowed a bit, Christy.
Okay. All right. Do you want to pull up the slides, Christiana, since I'm gonna have to bounce?
I wasn't sure if Selby was going to be sharing them or not, but let me see if I can
Oh,
confirm
truth.
them.
Okay.
Um, I can certainly look for that if you want to maybe review the agenda.
Kick it off. Okay, that sounds great. All right. Well, welcome everybody. Made it to our final System of Care Learning Collaborative of 2024. I see some new faces, new names. So if you've never been to this event, this is a monthly space co-hosted by the System of Care Advisory Council and Oregon Health Authority for anyone, everyone in system of care. So regional system of care partners, our tribal partners, folks who participate on system of care executive councils, advisory committees, youth, family, kind of everybody, anybody who's doing system of care work across the state is invited here. We cover a variety of topics. And part of today actually is going to be hearing a little bit from you about the topics you'd like to see us bring to these spaces in next year. So we're also going to spend most of today kind of reflecting on the learning collaboratives that were held in October and November. In October, we were joined by the Native Wellness Institute, who led a really moving discussion about being an ally in Indian country. And then last month, we were joined by Marietta from HealthShare, who led us in a conversation about partnership, meaningful, authentic partnership, particularly with communities of color. So yeah, we're going to talk a little bit, reflect on that. And that will be the plan for today. We've got a pretty small group and we've got some new folks joining us. So I wonder if we want to do a quick round of intros. Does that work for people? You can just say a hello, where you live, what you're bringing to the space today.
I'm Jeremy.
Great. Hi, Jeremy. Oh my
Hey,
gosh.
I'm real.
You're a real life person, not just an email. Thank you
Oh,
for being
yeah.
here.
Yeah, of course. It was a rare event being able to actually jump on here. So, Director of Planning, Transportation, and Capital Projects, Real Estate, and kind of interim forestry for CT Clusie, the Confederated Tribes of Coos, Lower Umpqua, and Sayusla Indians. And yeah, we really looking forward to leveraging systems of care for some additional expansion. So
Great.
thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here.
I'll jump in. I'm Cassandra Lester. Hi, I supervise the Children's Developmental Disabilities team here with Clackamas County.
Great.
Nice to meet everyone.
Nice. Thank you for being here.
Danny McAllister. I'm the System of Care Coordinator for Central Oregon. And I'm bringing a cold to this space today.
Sorry, Danny. It's going around, isn't it?
Yeah, 'tis the season.
Karen Cole, Cascade Health Alliance in Klamath Falls, Oregon, System of Care Coordinator.
Haley Van Horn. This is like my worst nightmare, popcorn style, being totally upfront and honest. Haley Van Horn, she, her pronouns, System of Care Coordinator, Lane County.
You did it. You did it, Haley. You jumped in there.
My shirt's perfect. It says anxious, but doing it anyways.
You're doing great.
Good afternoon, Gabe Dawson, he, him pronouns, Oregon Department of Human Services, serving Jackson, Josephine County as the Community Development Coordinator.
Awesome. Thanks, Gabe.
Natalie
Hello.
Gordon. Oops, sorry, Heather. Natalie Gordon, they, she pronouns, Prevent Child Abuse Oregon, and happy to be here.
I can't tell you how many times I flinch unmuting and remuting myself when we do popcorn. I just did that in the data subcommittee meeting too. I think I came off mute like 3 times. Anyway, Heather Pasco, System of Care Manager with the Marion County and Polk County region through the Willamette Health Council.
Hi, I'll go. It's Tracy Howard. I use she, her pronouns. I'm System of Care Specialist in Jackson County. Thanks.
I'll be brave. There I am. Hi, my name is Amanda Ray. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Behavioral Health System Specialist with Yamhill Community Care Organization, but that job title doesn't tell you why I'm here. Why I'm here is because I assist with our local system of care here in our county.
I'll go since we didn't do the hand raise thing, but that is a great idea. Way to put that in the chat. I'm Christiana Rhodes. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the OHA Wraparound and System of Care Coordinator.
I think that's everybody. Anybody have a chance? Okay. All right, Christiana, did you get the slides? Okay. Do you want to pull them up? So we're going to take a few minutes just in the beginning. I'm going to have to jump off at 4, unfortunately, but we wanted to spend a little time understanding kind of what topics you would like to see us bring to this space. So, you know, I could run through the list of topics to refresh people's memories, but a lot of you have been attending these for far longer than I have. So yeah, just kind of open brain jam. What kinds of things would you like to see us talk about in 2025? And while you think about that, maybe I can kind of run through some of the topics we've covered this past year. I know in 2023, there was a big series about kind of collective impact. Nat Jacobs, I think, had brought on an external contractor to lead some of those. In 2024, we had a lot of presentations from University of Connecticut. Remember, a lot of you were engaged with the SRSI, the System Reform Support Instrument, System of Care Governance Structures. They also led a couple of sessions related to data. So how do we use data in decision-making and to identify inequities? In February, we had a presentation about EPSDT, early periodic screening, diagnosis, and treatment benefit through OHP, pretty significant policy change for System of Care. We took a bit of a recess in July. We do have and we also last year, maybe some of you remember this, we put out a survey to folks. And so we've kind of been working our way through that survey of, and the topics that you all identified as being, you know, things that you wanted to bring to the space, but would love to just open it up for a second. If there are other things that come to mind that you'd like to see us talk about. Natalie.
I apologize. I'm newer to this group, so if this is a topic that's been covered, please let me know. But have been wanting to learn more about involvement of youth spaces or youth civic engagement is a big topic that keeps coming up for us.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was also thinking around whether it's justice system or health system, care systems within those spaces, getting a little bit more nuanced and learning a little bit more about those, and maybe with the specific lens of Oregon practices and So those were the first two things that popped into mind.
Can you say more about the second one? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, so I think this one popped in my head from hearing from a partner that was talking about the Department of Justice as well as correction, and was talking about the healthcare system within that space. And so just like was thinking around, like, instead of it being just health or just justice, we start diving into some of those categories that might be informative or help us understand some different perspectives of systems.
Great. All right, Selby, I see your comment. Like, information only is less helpful, especially when you can get that from somewhere else. Good to know.
I was just trying to type it, but my fingers aren't working in the chat box how I want. Oh, and I'm totally interrupting Dana. I'm sorry. I was going to say, sometimes a challenge I had this past year was kind of that thing of like moving from planning to action. And so I found when I was seeking advice, like from some of my trusted advisors, I was usually like, you know, how do I launch the initiative? How do I find my champions? How do I get work groups going? I mean, beyond just like get a roster and schedule a meeting, is that it? Kind of thing. How do I transition more leadership and speaking power to my committee chair? So kind of really focusing a lot more on the implementation versus planning. So anyway, something along those lines. Those were challenges that came up for me this past year.
Dana?
Yeah, so unlike Selby, I don't know that much about EPSDT. I would totally wouldn't mind looking it up on my own. It just came up the last couple of weeks a couple of times about like referral kind of information, or pre-authorizations actually, and they were asking me about that, and I was like, I feel really inadequate answering these questions. But more than that, going back to the original question, I feel like it's getting more complicated, or the landscape has changed when we get to cross-distance review committees, and who do you approve for wraparound or not? And I know Christiana's on here, and we have this conversation in a different work group, but sometimes the kids aren't in they're in two systems, but they're not necessarily in the systems we would think of them to be in for wraparound. So typically with wraparound, it's about mental health and then something else. And sometimes you get kids that are in multiple systems but aren't eligible for mental health really, or they've outgrown it or something like that. And so I just find that comes up a lot with our cross systems, and it makes it hard to navigate and how and who we choose to approve and to wrap around.
Okay. So kind of coordinating a wraparound with other services? Okay. Haley?
I use my trusty little hand, makes me feel better. Such a rule follower. All right, I love this space. I think we cover so much great stuff. And I have to agree with Selby on the actual like implementing of things within a SOC committee structure. I'm so thankful for other spaces we have, like our office hours, where that's for SOC coordinators to come and ask our questions. And then there are grantee collaboratives where we kind of focus in specifically. And I think that this space is amazing, having folks who are not necessarily SOC coordinators, but who are in the broader system. Like I learned so much from just like an example is like the question that Dana just asked. However, I do feel like when it comes to the actual coordination role, or whatever we call ourselves, the people actually convening the system of care meetings, facilitating them, planning them, things like that, there tend to be a lot of topics that build up that we don't necessarily get to cover on a consecutive basis, right? it would be nice to either every other one of these meetings, we specifically focus on something that like strategic planning, right? I know that that's kind of in the background for all of us. I know it's a big topic for SOCAC, but those pieces that actually like help move the work forward. I am my system of care is pretty in need of those. And just the like a space for being able to grow our system of care, I suppose. All the information again presented is super helpful. I also have another idea. I think it would be really cool to hear from other states and how their system of care operates. I know that I like routinely will Google, I'm like, does this state use system of care? And then I find myself so confused on like, well, how are they doing it that way? Why do we do it the way we do? I, to this day, do not fully understand, having read like most of that primer, right? Like I call it like the system of care, you know, like religious texts, like I've read most of it, but that's being generous. I've read some of it. But I don't really understand how Oregon has interpreted it and how other states interpret it and how we've landed here, I guess. So a little historical lesson would just be so welcome and appreciated. Thank you.
I love that, Haley. That would also be like super valuable for me and for SOCAC, I think, particularly as we get into our strategic planning.
Yeah.
Just having
Thanks.
perspective on what other states do. Yeah.
So if we could just have a meeting every week, that would be great. No big deal.
All right, Heather.
I would echo some of the things that Haley just mentioned. Haley beat me to it, but I was thinking about the systems of care in other states, especially those that would be like the closest to us in proximity, for like alignment purposes or just kind of understanding nearby states. I know that there are some others though that are doing great work on the other side of the country. So I do think that would be pretty interesting. I was also thinking, and I don't know if this is quite what Haley was getting at, but like different skills that it takes to facilitate and or be an engaged member of system of care. I was thinking kind of about some of those TIO trainings or trauma-informed organ trainings that were not a part of this space, but just like the benefit that I felt in being part of those trainings where it did give a tangible skill that could be taken back to the system of care. And I also think that just as much as the facilitators need skills, I think that those who engage in system of care can also benefit from skill development in certain spaces where if we could, you know, really encourage our system of care members to attend certain learning collaboratives, you know, they would see how many system of care members there are across the state and kind of like broaden the view of what system of care is. I mean, I know some probably have a better optics on that than others, but I think that could be really interesting. And then when I think about like what this space is intended for, my brain goes to the training thing. It goes to the information piece, which I feel a little disconnected from sometimes when we go just information, because I put a question mark like, how do I implement this? Or like, what do I do with this? Even though it's awesome to learn about. But then the third thing that came to mind was kind of, and I know we have other spaces that we could do this in also, so it might not be the right space, but I'm just going to word vomit it now while I'm thinking about it. Learning more about the strategic plans or just like the goals of our systems of care across the state and trying to find different alignment points or like just kind of seeing what the similarities or differences are to be, I guess, to have like a dedicated space once in a while to just see what everybody's doing. And like, maybe it's mandatory that everybody gives us a little update of what they're doing or whoever's attending or something, but thinking from a broader view of like what the overarching goals are for the year, how do we kind of align them, or who do we buddy up with? Who do we reach out to and say, hey, you're doing something similar to me. Can we brainstorm or something like that?
It's great. Thank you, Heather, making all the notes. Selby, I think you had your hand raised, didn't you?
Yeah, and then I started typing it because I'm excited today and I'm talking too much probably. So I was reflecting on the idea of bringing in information about system of cares from across the nation. And I was just going to highlight, I don't know, maybe Chris was the only one around that long ago. PSU did a series for us, PSU Sockeye, where they brought in presenters from system of care across the nation. So there is some historical stuff there. I don't know if those meetings were recorded or where they're housed, but I think at the time it was confusing and people didn't always know how to apply the information presented to themselves. So for example, like I think there was something about some bicycle program, and you could see, yes, a bicycle program could be somehow, it's like, I don't know, maybe it's for bicycle program for youth out of juvenile justice. So again, a great nonprofit idea, but then people were like, well, what do I do with that for my system of care and barrier resolution? So just kind of expressing some curiosity about that idea, or what types of things from other systems of care people might actually be wanting to hear about.
So I think I'm hearing kind of some themes here around like less information about specific supports and services, or at least like when that is the topic, being very clear and articulate about like, this is how you can apply this information, or why this might, you know, here's a next step, here's why this information is important or relevant, or here's what you can do with this information. Hearing a lot of interest in looking at other states and models of other states, again, with kind of a, with discussion about like, well, what does that mean to me, to us, to my region? And hearing a lot of need around just kind of, I think of them as kind of like soft skills a little bit related to like system of care infrastructure. So in terms of like engagement and collective impact really is kind of what I'm hearing, right? How do you bring people together for system transformation, strategic planning being a part of that. Kara's comment, Sockeye would be wonderful beginning with System of Care 101. Maybe I'm the only one with a new manager. Maybe this exists. I think recap student turnover is very warranted. Yes. Yes. And part of the other dream that we have here is to actually put together like a new System of Care coordinator orientation for everybody. That would maybe be some sort of like written document. It could be kind of a, you know, some sort of resources that when new people step into this role, it's a very big role. And oftentimes you don't get a lot of support or information. So there is a dream that we would put something like that together. Unfortunately, at the moment, we don't have a ton of capacity to do that, but it is something on our wish list that hopefully we will get to at some point. But yeah, there are some resources, and any of you are more than welcome to email me or to email Christiana. We can definitely direct you to resources. There's a lot out there. So don't feel like you have to go at it alone. And also, of course, coordinators around the state are an invaluable resource to anyone in this work. So. Okay. Anything else before we turn it over to Selby, who's gonna lead our review of the past couple of months and thinking about how we apply that learning. Okay, well, thank you all so much for these great ideas. There is a work group. We meet monthly. It's myself, Christiana, Anna, Joylene steps in from time to time, and Selby is the local System of Care coordinator in that group as well. Other coordinators are welcome to join. We meet on a very early Friday morning, once a month. But that is where we kind of plan these sessions. We kind of make decisions about what topics, who's going to talk, what presenters we want to get lined up. So if you want to help improve this space or get more involved with planning at the state level, we would always welcome you. And if you can't, you can always direct your suggestions to Selby. Okay, Selby.
I just was going to interject real quick, and I think I have the wrong version of the slides, maybe not the most recent one. So I wonder if Selby has her slide deck and could just get started, and I will see if I can find the most up-to-date one.
I do have my slide deck out, the one that I put full group edits on, so that one, and I'm happy to share. And I signed out and then signed back in because I was having microphone trouble. So I should introduce myself because there's some new faces for me here today. So my name's Selby Stebbins. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the System of Care Coordinator for the Tri-County Metro System of Care. So Clackamas, Washington, and Multnomah counties. I'm based at Health Share of Oregon in Portland. And like Christy said, I'm part of the planning committee for the Learning Collaborative. I joked earlier that I was excited today. I am. I've just had a day of meetings, including multiple presentations, and now I'm coming here to present again. So I'll be a little bit even more maybe chatterboxy and hyper than I normally am. So having said that, let's see, am I able to share? Okay, let me get some slides ready. There we go. Okay. All right, I'm going to move my Zoom controls out of the way here. Okay, so moving on. So I was charged with kind of the reflection piece to set the ground for our reflections for the last two learning collaboratives. And so I actually had the luxury of being able to listen to this entire session again, and it did take time, but it was well worth it. And I would actually really encourage you as we head into the holiday season, when sometimes our workloads can be a little bit more quiet, to go ahead and listen again to these presentations. Jean in particular was just Jean talking. You could almost listen to it like a podcast, but I found it actually very worthwhile to be able to focus in and listen again to some of the things he talked about. The title of the session was Being an Ally in Indian Country. And while his presentation did address what it looks like to be an ally, the consistent theme of his presentation was really more about knowing who you are. And this idea that when you know who you are as a human being, you can begin to see and relate to others as human beings. And so he did talk to us as well about taking care of the integrity of who we are. And a good way to start being an ally to our wider community is to be our own ally. He also spent some time, quite a bit of time, kind of talking about, again, getting to know yourself as a human being and how you introduce yourself and present yourself to the world. So he asked us a lot of questions to consider about who walks into the room with you. Who are your ancestors? Who dreamed you into existence? What are your skills, gifts, and talents? So it wasn't really about what's your job, like what are you doing when you introduce yourself and you are reaching out to be an ally. It's really more about what are you doing in the community and kind of how are you an ally to yourself. And so I will, trying to think when I wanted to play the video clip here. It also really struck me through Jean's presentation that connecting with Oregon's tribal partners was not about presenting the legitimacy of system of care, the value of this work and how it's implemented in Oregon, the barrier resolution work of our committees, what SOC can offer to tribal partners, et cetera, which I think is kind of the business-oriented way we might often approach our system of care work. But that really it's just simply about meeting people, being vulnerable, and learning how to collaborate together. He also used the expression that the quality of your questions equals the quality of your choices. And that the questions we really need to be asking are things like, how can you help us learn to do this better? What are your needs? What do you want? And what stops you from getting what you want? So if we can take that approach, we lean into all the ways that being an ally was described or defined by Jean as someone who listens to learn and understand, someone who is present, someone who walks alongside you, or he said even walks behind you because they have your back, someone who wants to do things differently than how they were done in the past, someone who cares and shares values, and someone who decenters themselves. And when I thought about it, I think those kind of phrases or questions or this idea of getting to know yourself as a human being so that you can get to know others and relate to them as human beings is a way we can be an ally to all different kinds of communities and all different kinds of peoples. So I have a brief clip to share, and I think I actually have to stop and reshare a screen. And I've got just a moment, I do have it queued up. And this is a clip where he's talking about how you are a dream come into existence, and we are dreaming a future generation into existence.
But that's a little bit of who I am. So who are you? Who are your ancestors? Who dreamt you into existence? Even if you come from the adoption of that you've been adopted or you don't know, but there is some ancestor that dreamt you into existence. And if you go back far enough in your heritage, you are a prayer, you are a dream that has come into fruition. And sometimes that's what I need just to keep myself going. No, sometimes I need that purpose to keep myself going, that I am a dream. And so I've been dreamt into existence. And I love that. And part of the reason why we're here, if you look deep enough into our belief systems, our value systems, that we're dreaming the future generation into existence, right? Yeah, because one day that's guaranteed in our lives is we will be an ancestor. That is a guarantee. Nothing else is really guaranteed in our lives, except that we will be an ancestor. Yeah. And again, that's a whole another ceremonial system that we could talk about too. But that's a but who are you? Who dreamt you into existence?
I think it's hard to stop his video because everything he said was so impactful. Sorry to have to keep switching back and forth to do my sharing here. Let me find my slide deck.
I did find the right version, Selby. So if it's helpful for me to do some sharing, please let me know and I can do that now.
Okay. I've just got 3 little slides, so
Okay,
we're
perfect.
pretty quick here. Okay. So the second presentation we had was from my colleague Mariata here at HealthShare about authentic engagement with diverse communities. So again, I did actually take the time to listen to the whole thing again. And as I said, found it really worthwhile. So I know it's a time commitment, but I really do encourage you to if you have the time, to take a listen again. So Mariata actually began her presentation with asking us how we would utilize the information that we take away from her presentation. And so I think it was a great opportunity that we were coming back today to talk about the takeaways and how we can use this information, because that was her first question to us when she started her presentation. She spent some time reviewing important keywords and concepts like equity, health equity, privilege, and power. I think words that many of us have heard before, but what I really appreciated is that she didn't read those definitions verbatim or even necessarily directly explain the terms, but she instead really talked about how do these concepts show up in our work and impact our work and our relationship with others. And she actually offered us a new phrase called actionable accomplishment and wove examples of what that could look like throughout her presentation. Some of the ideas around actionable accomplishment, I can't even say accomplishment, that she brought up included some of the bullet points there on the slide around giving up or reframing power and privilege, which can allow you to stand in solidarity with someone. It included taking into consideration the multiple identities that people can hold And if you're able to do that, you can again kind of clarify what privilege and oppression look like. Lots of self-assessment and mindfulness that we need in order to do this work. And she also talked about coming from a place of transparency and honesty, showing up and keeping our word. And finally, her presentation, the last several slides, the title on them was all the same. It was all "You get to decide." And she talked a lot about the things that we get to decide. So she mentioned, for example, there are things we get to decide, like how we show up for our work and how are we using the tools that we have been given. How are we actively engaging and practicing health equity concepts and processes? How are we actually taking the time and the space for talking about race and ethnicity? How it's important to know what we know and what we don't, and to honor the expertise of the people who are most impacted. So I just really appreciated how she empowered us all by kind of this concept of we get to decide how we engage with this work and what we do with it. So again, I chose a small video clip from Mariata, and it was near the end of her presentation. And I really appreciated that she took a few minutes to talk to us about repurposing our privilege and how that can be a really wonderful place to begin this work.
In this perspective, this is my last point. I think it's really important. Everyone isn't going to agree, and we don't have to. But what is important is that you have to honor the expertise and knowledge of folks who are most impacted, because it's that information that teaches you how to engage with them, and to understand that your own history shows up and that you're accountable for what you bring into the space. And to repurpose your privilege, to raise awareness, to be a consistent voice of support is really helpful. And if that's all you have capacity to do, it's okay. It is appreciated. Because we need folks who are able to continue to raise awareness. We need folks who are able to help help figure out how to get other folks to do different pieces of the work. Everyone has a role to play, right? And so knowing your boundaries and your capacity makes a significant difference in how you can move forward.
Oops, sorry. All right, and I have one final slide. Okay, so after getting a chance to actually re-listen to these and think about them in a more thoughtful way than kind of maybe in the exhausted or even maybe sometimes kind of hyper state of attending the Learning Collaborative, I really felt like actually both of these presentations were very similar and that the same themes were resonating through both. That both of them really offered us the opportunity to be aware of and understand ourselves and how to reflect on that knowledge impacts our relationship and engagement with others, especially with those communities who are impacted by historical and present day harm. I also felt like they didn't offer a step-by-step process of what to do, but rather they provided illustrations of like what our relationships could look like and what our work can look like if we bring our own self-awareness into these areas. Remember, Jean talked about things like listening to others, being present, sharing your values and decentering yourself. And I really liked, again, what Mariata said about being able to take into account the multiple identities that people hold can help us clarify what privilege and oppression look like and give you more opportunities for authentic engagement. Mariata also used the phrase of reframe the shame, and Jean touched on a similar sentiment. So Mariata was talking about how we can be afraid of opening our mouths and saying the wrong thing, but that it's okay to say, I don't know enough. Can you direct me to someone who does? And she challenged us, how do you gain access to the people who have the lens you don't have to teach you something that you don't know, but that you need to do in your work? And Jean spoke to it in regards of somebody had asked him about how can we engage with tribal partners, in particular if your ancestors were part of the community that harmed the Native American community. And he said, again, reframe that shame, acknowledge that harm, and that you also want to change it, that there's value in wanting to change that. And it's okay. We have to hear those stories because they happened. We can acknowledge and learn them, and it's an opportunity for all of us to heal. Finally, at the end of her presentation, Marietta talked about how she works with her head, her heart, and her hands. And she mentioned, but didn't describe in her presentation, a project that she and I are working on together here at HealthShare. And that project happens to be around reducing bias in hiring and increasing equity in hiring. And this is an effort I've been engaged with for several years at HealthShare. And what I loved about it was that it feels like I'm really putting something I had learned into tangible practice. And so after years of attending workshops and trainings, I was actually working to make concrete change where I took something out of my head from all the different trainings and moved it into my heart and really believed that it was important and that I could make an impact. And then I started actually working with my hands on those tangible changes. And after I watched these presentations, I really had to pause and challenge myself if I had taken that same approach with my system of care community engagement work. And if I hadn't, what could I commit to doing differently? So I found it really a valuable exercise to have these presentations, and I'm really so happy we're coming back today to revisit them. Thanks.
Thank you, Selby. Yeah, so the hope is that with the messages that we've received and those learnings, that we have some discussion as a group about kind of what our next steps are within our system of care. And so I will see if I can now share my slide so we can talk about those discussion points. Christy, before you head out, is there any other things that you would like to share while I get the slideshow ready again?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Thank you, Selby. You do such an incredible job taking all these rich conversations and like distilling it into these super digestible, yet still like really rich takeaways. Great. Thank you so much.
Just gonna move towards the discussion. So we had talked about, I was like, am I on mute? Nope. We talked about doing this in like breakout groups, but I think with our size today, we can have this as kind of group discussion. I know some folks are going to be more comfortable having that conversation in the chat. Others are going to be more comfortable speaking out loud, but we'll use our hands to share that we're ready to speak. But let's just start with what we can do to build partnerships with tribes in your region. And then we'll kind of go from there, and I'll kind of monitor the time so we can make sure we can talk through both of these discussion points. So thinking about Jean's presentation and also what Selby has shared as the takeaways, what can you do in your system of care or in your community to build those partnerships with tribes? Or perhaps there's something you're already doing that you could share with folks.
Honestly, Christiana, in my region, it just doesn't come up very often. Like, probably never in the last 5 years, honestly. But I worked for a tribe for 12 years in California, so I'm very passionate about it. I just haven't experienced it in Southern Oregon, that's all.
I could respond to that, but I think I'll go ahead and see if Haley maybe is responding to that, or maybe Haley, you have something separate. Okay. Dana, I guess I would ask, is there anything that you specifically could do that you can imagine doing to kind of move that forward in your community or in your system of care?
I don't really know of like any like local tribes. Like I think they're more like outliers, like maybe like more in like Klamath County
Mm-hmm.
or like some of the other counties surrounding us. But yeah, in the 5 years of like RAP and ESA, PCIT, like I rarely run up against any kind of tribal kids even. And certainly not ICWA. I think in 5 years, ICWA, I've run up against it once. You know, that used to be like a very familiar thing for me. And so it's interesting to not be there in this community. And yet it just never like shows up. So I appreciate your question about what can I do since I have the experience. And I haven't like really found a way. Like I'm not sure what the catalyst would be for me to like really like spearhead something in this community, which just really makes me feel more sad, honestly, because it's like we don't want less of that, we want more of that, right? So yeah.
I mean, I can imagine just starting points for that could be even just figuring out like the tribes in your area, not speaking directly to you, Dana, but just in general, like getting to know the tribes in your area. One of the things that our team has been able to do is as we travel, we've been able to visit some of the cultural centers, for example, and do some learning there on the tribes. So, you know, I appreciate you sharing like where you're coming in, right? That is a starting point. And I know that Jean would back us on that too. It's just starting with learning. Yeah. And then how can we engage? What's that next step? I will move to Haley, and then if anyone else has some success stories in their community about how they have engaged with tribes, that would be awesome. Haley?
Yeah, thanks, Christiana. I shared pretty openly with Jean, who I just found to be the most magical human that I've encountered in some time. And I meet a lot of magical humans. I mean, most of y'all are magical humans because I've had one-to-ones with you, so I've seen your magic. Jean basically was like, Haley, you talk really fast. And that was really good feedback for me. And I shared, like I led with vulnerability. We talked about Brene for a minute and just like, I've kind of built it up in my head that I'm like scared to reach out because I'm so afraid as being seen as like checking a box or like white savior complex or things. And so I really left the conversation with Jean. Thank y'all so much for making that happen. Feeling like I just kind of have to just go for it. And before I could even do that, the universe intervened and one of our newer community partners did a warm handoff between myself and the Coquell Wellness Center that we have here in Lane County. We actually have a couple of them. And I've got a meeting tomorrow. And so it's like the start. But I kind of want to also hit on something that, you know, Dana said. And Dana, excuse me, I'm not sure of like fully what your role is. I kind of get a little confused about what everybody does, especially in this space, but I appreciate you being here. I appreciate your honesty and vulnerability. I think that at least within the system of care, you know, we're responsible for outreach to so many different demographics and that's intentional and that's great. And I know that I get overwhelmed by it. And so something I'm really wanting to lean into with my system of care from the School of Selby is like to empower them to bring people to the table. Like, why do I need to reinvent the wheel, or why should I, if there are already some existing partnerships between the people attending the system of care meetings and some of these amazing organizations, as well as just generally our tribes. So I think the hard part is when, you know, I have asked before and it looks like the system of care structure is not the only one in Lane County that's not well connected with kind of our tribal partners. And so that to me does speak to like a broader issue. And I would almost challenge anyone who says that like, it's not really an issue in our community. Well, we can look at the data and see that it is, and that Black, Brown, and our Native kids are the ones that are getting suspended and expelled and, you know, all sorts of things. So it's unfortunate for so many reasons that there isn't just like a clearer path. So I would also say, to go back to that original question from Christy about like, what do we want to see in this space? I get so jazzed anytime I see information about the history of system of care within our tribes, or like broadly, like nationwide and things. It's still not something I have the clearest picture of here in Oregon, like what that looks like. And I know Selby and so many of you did an amazing job of fostering that one-off we had with our tribal liaisons within the CCOs and maybe a few other partners. And I know that was a big, heavy lift, but I got so much out of that. So yeah, all that to say, the universe intervened on my behalf. I really appreciated it. And I am going to lead with vulnerability in approaching tribal partners like Jean taught me. And I still haven't learned that lesson about not speaking quickly, as we see now. That's all.
Thanks, Haley. I think Christy, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thanks, Haley. I'm super excited. Like, definitely keep us posted. I also love your suggestion around like wanting to know more and learn more about what Oregon's tribes are doing as it relates to system of care. You know, we give them $200,000 as part of our grant, and they are doing incredibly beautiful things like capital projects. I mean, it's wonderful. So, you know, would love to see about inviting some of them to this space to share out. Jeremy, no pressure. But I think there's just like a lot of really cool things there. And then SOCAT could do better about trying to facilitate that sharing. I'm curious too, like, you know, CCOs all have a tribal liaison whose like primary job is to connect community partners with tribes in the name of like improved health outcomes. So if you don't know who your tribal liaison is or haven't engaged them in your system of care, like, I don't know, show of hands, like how many people have a connection with or know who their tribal liaison is? I'm just curious. You raise your hand if you.
I want to come off mute just real fast and say I definitely know who mine are, and like they've downright said just like how overwhelmed they are. Like,
yeah,
it's really a stinky situation.
True, right? And like, yeah, I think that is just like a challenge with system of care in general, right? Like as a state agency in relationship with sovereign nations, and first and foremost wanting to respect what their priorities are, which isn't necessarily always about system of care, right? And like there's other more important and like typically like very you know, limited staff resources to do the work. So that is a real challenge. Jeremy, I saw you turn your camera on. I don't know if you want to jump in here and say anything, but
I mean, what are the questions really? I think from my perspective, very minimal, like narrow perspective is this is a really awesome opportunity to, I mean, you've been insanely flexible in terms of utilization of funding, and this funding is going to great things. But if I'm hearing you correctly, you're saying that a lot of tribal members or the folks that you're working with are having a hard time with just the amount of stuff coming at them and the requirements of system of care, I'm assuming reporting. Is that accurate?
I don't think it's the reporting. I mean, we only require a report. I think just generally.
I know, I think I'm the only one that doesn't do it.
Not true, but I think just generally, right? Like,
yeah. Well, and it's an administration change.
Yeah.
Coming, you know, I think there's a lot of, you know, trepidation across the board. Everyone that I interact with, I feel like there's a new training or call with different tribes in Oregon almost every week. And there is this frustration and this, I don't want to say fear, but definitely, maybe that is the best word. Just like what's gonna happen to all of this funding. I know, for example, that there's that like a block grant that is now completely up in the air that we were completely banking on, ICDBG grant. And now because of the administration change, everybody's going, I don't know, that's HUD funded, and who knows if we're ever gonna know. We were supposed to have the award announcement in mid-November. And that's just one example of several grants. So, I mean, if I'm at all speaking for any other tribal liaison, or I can't remember the term you utilized, I would say we should all definitely be jumping on these grant funds that are being made readily available and aren't nearly as iffy. State or federally funded, it doesn't matter. So I don't know. Yeah, there's a lot going on, no doubt. It's the end of the year too, and holidays, and
Yeah.
it's kind of nature of the beast
Yeah.
when working in this capacity.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're a small tribe by comparison. I think the only smaller tribe in comparison in Oregon is like Burns Paiute. So, but we have 16 capital projects going on right now. And I would imagine even Burns and Paiute, who have a massive land holding, probably have a ton more projects going on. And with more projects comes more programs and program staff and all of that. So yeah, there's probably a ton of just craziness going on. You mix that with the economy being what it is and not investing enough in crypto, and it's just wild times.
See, Dana's got a hand up. I also want to call out Karen's comment. I know the Klamath tribes are doing some really incredible things in Klamath County, and there does seem to be a pretty strong, from my very outside Portland perspective, it seems like there's a strong relationship there between Advanced Health and the tribes. But Karen would love to hear what that looks like if you want to share. Dana.
Yeah, I think coming from California to a different state, which is Southern Oregon, for me, anyways, and when you look at that map and the link that I sent, it just looks very different, right? There's not very many tribal entities here in Southern Oregon, and so I think that's why we don't see a lot of influx. I mean, rarely do I see any tribal kids come through wraparound. I don't hear lots of speak about tribal things. And I'll just say that was the best experience of my life. I spent 12 years working with tribes in Northern California, and it was so amazing to just work with the tribe, work with the people, learn things. It was amazing. And since I moved to Southern Oregon, it's less amazing in that way, because it's not prevalent. So I do encourage anybody that has access to making it more accessible to that, to jump on that wagon, because it's great. Not only is it the right thing to do, but it's just great. It advances us as white people, if I have to call that out. It advances us, and gets us just back to roots of things that are ignored typically in white culture. So yeah.
Thank you, Dana. I'm just catching up with the chat because I wasn't able to see that. So catching up on that. Amanda?
I just wanted to respond to one of the things that Dana brought up just now. I was actually in a training with the Native Wellness Institute this morning. So very appropriate timing. And while, basing information on that list of 9 federally recognized tribes in Oregon is a good starting point, so much of the conversation this morning was around the problem. I think the phrasing that they utilized was termination, that there are a lot of Native folks present in Oregon whose tribes are not federally recognized. And that brings a whole other level of complication to this already complicated idea of partnership. And so I just kind of wanted to call out, Dana, when you said you were looking at the map and you're like, there's none here I don't see any in my community. There probably are Native and Indigenous folks in your community, but that there's no federally recognized tribe for them. And so how do we find groups that are representing those folks? How do we find voices who might be interested in participating in SOC? Certainly starting with that list of 9 is a good starting point, but and just from learning this morning that shouldn't be the end of it necessarily.
No, that's a super good call out, Amanda. Like,
Yeah.
because when I lived in Northern California, it wasn't a federally recognized tribe that I worked for. And somehow they were just very much on the map in the community. And so it made it just more prevalent. I'm not sure how we do that in these other smaller communities where there's not a larger tribal population. I would love to figure that out, and I'm not opposed to it at all. I think it is well deserved and everybody benefits from it, but I just haven't ran across in the last, 4 or 5 years of learning this job, I just haven't ran across very much of the population through any of my programs. And so it's been a little bit elusive to me, honestly. Coming from working from tribal work to that, it's been super elusive.
Seeing Haley's comment in the chat is also bringing me back to Jean's presentation and just talking about the system distrust that tribal members have, predominantly with the white community, and just system distrust and how we've done harm in the past. And so back to like, how do we build that relationship? How do we show up as our authentic selves, and using that as that means to like bridge that relationship, because that is first and foremost the teachings that Jean provided, right? For us to just show up as our authentic selves. But again, kind of back to Amanda's point, like, how do we figure out where that community is so that we could even do the engagement? And yeah, I mean, Dana, in my wraparounds for 2 years in Benton County prior to this, I had one youth that came really wanting to, connect with his Native American culture, and only one. And so, here as well, I had the same type of experience where it was just, where were the individuals that are in this population? Yeah, it's a good question.
I think my quick answer is that where I came from in Northern California in Redding, there was a reservation there. And so it was pretty easy to find the population, I think. And being here in Southern Oregon, there's not one to my knowledge, and there's not a health center where they show up to, which we also have in Northern California. And so I think that that's part of the problem. And I also don't see, I mean, the good news for me is I don't see very many of them come through DHS, which means that somewhere, I'm hoping, I don't know this to be true, but I'm hoping that they are in their ICWA and on their reservations and going through some of those judicial systems rather than our white judicial systems. But I'm also rose-colored lenses sometimes, so there's that.
I'm just going to apologize. I'm having some internet trouble, so I'll just say that I didn't hear everything you said, Dana, so I apologize. I will go ahead and move to Selby.
Well, I remember learning from the previous CCO liaison here at HealthShare that we used to have a different one. There's actually multiple layers, like the tribal governance structure actually has multiple layers. And so I'm just kind of reminding ourselves to think really expansively, because I can't even remember them all off the top of my head. I think I have a map about it, but there's multiple forms of governance and different coalitions that come together in different places and different way tribes can interact with each other. And so there's actually a multi-layer system within Oregon. It's not, we don't need to necessarily be thinking in terms of these small discrete units. But I'm also saying like one small little tidbit of concrete advice Jean said was just show up and volunteer somewhere. Again, like not even starting. I almost feel like we're framing our discussion today kind of in the way we're used to doing it, but which is very different than what I feel like Marietta and Jean were encouraging us to do, because we're still thinking kind of in this business way of what's our process for engagement. And really, they, talked a lot again about kind of dealing with ourselves first. And then Jean was saying, show up at the event and help pick up trash. There's always something that can be done, and just, make that connection, but maybe that connection just means getting to know each other. I know that sometimes in the past when I've done community engagement, like I have a whole pitch and what we can offer you and what the opportunities are and this stuff, and really to just maybe leave all that business aside and just show up as people first and take that time and have a very different kind of expectation. And Jean talked a lot about like when you're introducing yourself, it's that and he was saying how in his native community, in his communities, that again, they don't care so much about what you're doing in your job, but what are you doing for the community? And so just kind of really needing to think about creating these relationships, maybe think of it as relationship creation instead of, building that partnership. Maybe first I'm just going to create I hope I can create or make some connection, but I've really been kind of trying to challenge myself a little bit based in light of their two presentations about how to approach this in a different way.
Thank you, Selby. Thanks for bringing us back around. And you're so right. He did say that, and it's so true. Yeah. Dana?
Yeah, I feel like I'm talking a lot today. I would absolutely agree with Selby. Like that is how you interact. That is what is taught in that community. And it's such a different experience than being in our meetings. Like I was just in a leadership meeting today and everybody's like, hey, I'm Dana Brooks. I'm the youth programs manager. Like that's not how you show up with tribal people and in tribal situations. And it's so much richer when you don't do that. And I think it just brings us back to just not as a checkbox of trying to connect with tribal people, because that's not what it's about. It really, like going through that process, brings you back to connections of who we are and who we're supposed to be and what we're supposed to be doing and how we care for people, how we care for each other. Like it's a very different experience. And I will not apologize for being emotional.
Other thoughts about that before we move on to kind of the second part of the breakout discussion? I think my response to kind of what you were saying, Dana, is just how important that relationship building is. And we know that happens in wraparound, and that's a big foundation of wraparound. But also, as we've become so disconnected in our virtual world, we make these little attempts to build that relationship and connection by having icebreakers and this and that. But like, what an opportunity we would have, whether in this meeting or in a system of care space, just to really get to know one another, get to know about the ancestry, as Jean talked about, or, what your favorite thing to do is outside of work, or, those things that make you who you are and what you show up to the table with. And I do think we miss that a lot, not just in these spaces, but in our system of care and other spaces. And you know, how do we build that relationship so that we can do the work together and do it in collaboration versus just trying to do the work. And so laying that foundation of that relationship and just getting to know one another. Yeah, so when we talk about like who are your trusted partners, what will progress look like? Maybe progress is just getting to know one another at a deeper level. Find out what's meaningful for you, find out what's meaningful for me, see if we have some shared values in those spaces. Yeah.
And that really, thank you for summarizing, Christiana. And that really is, in my experience, it usually took me like 2 years, honestly, to like build relationship. Like, and so I did it for 12, 14 years, like 13 years. But it usually took like 12 years. You could get very far in a lot of ways. With ICWA, it was different. It was faster, right? But that is a lot of also white world in that that they've had to adapt to. But when you're really talking about connecting with the just the roots of any kind of tribe, it takes a lot longer. It takes a lot longer. And it was usually average about 2 years of this is how you build relationship. And until you get there, you're not going to get a whole lot of information in my experience. You'll get some, but there's just not a lot of trust, right? There's lots of historical and generational trauma. And you just have to work through that. And the only way to do that is through relationship. You can't talk about it. You can't have a meeting about it. Like, you just have to build relationship. And that's where the barriers break down, in my experience.
I think it's important to acknowledge too that even within systems of care, we may have distrust between system partners that prevent us from doing the work. And so, you know, how do we get members of our SOC communities together and have those conversations, sometimes the hard conversations that lead us to move in a different direction and forward our work too. So just looking at that from all angles and perspectives. Let's move on to the second part of the breakout conversation. We have about 15 minutes left. And so let's expand on this. Mariata's themes were very similar to Jean's, as Selby has shared. And so thinking about, like, again, what can we do with our head, our hearts, and our hands to build partnerships with diverse communities in our region? Any specific ideas or takeaways from the presentation? What you're already doing at your local system of care or what you might do? In some ways, it's hard to come back to that conversation because then I'm just like back in my, you know, like, here I am following my bureaucratic policies that are white centric and, you know, so.
It is a little bit like that, Christiana, if I'm honest. Like,
yeah.
Yeah, I think just really getting to know like who the tribes are in your area and starting to build relationships is really where you start. It's really hard to put it on an agenda because not everybody is going to want to talk to you. Not everybody's going to want to spend time with you. Some people will want to spend more time with you, but honestly, if you make one right connection, it travels in the tribal communities typically. So if you can get one person that you can relate with and they're willing to continue to meet with you, then that's really, I think, where change starts to happen in some of the diversity of white culture and tribal culture. And if I'm being totally transparent, which I am, I've basically had to spend 2 years as an intern going up at lunchtime and hanging out at the front desk with the people that saw the people every day. Some of them were with that tribe, some of them weren't, but they're the ones that saw the people in the lobby, the people that saw how they showed up in the parking lot. They understood the relationships and all the dynamics. And they answered the phones, they checked people in. Like, that is really where I found myself having to start. But I was also in a tribal health clinic, but that's where I finally started to understand the relationship piece of how it was to interact with a tribal culture. And there was a couple of them that literally took me 2.5 years that wouldn't give me the time of day at all. And once I got past that, then it became like this plethora of people that they referred to me. And then somehow I became this tribal kind of therapist, whatever, but that's besides the point. It's how you built the relationship and how long it took. And it just really took a long time of dedication.
Yeah, and what I hear is that relationship building and the trust that came as a result of that relationship building, and then allyship, right? And folks recognizing that you were in fact an ally and that you could be trusted.
Yeah, and that you were gonna be there too.
Mhm.
But it takes like, I felt like it took that long all the time. And so even once I started to get like the referral plethora kind of thing, it still takes another 2 years for somebody in therapy, because that's what my job was then, to really share everything with you. So everything was kind of like this 2-year benchmark in my mind of like, this is just the timing that it takes to work in this culture and this population.
Thank you, Dana. Thank you so much for just being so vulnerable and open today and sharing. Yeah, do others have things they'd like to share, whether it be ideas for next steps or things that are already happening in their system of care or community as it relates to engagement with tribes or diverse communities in your region? Or just for you, what your next step is?
I think I want to step away from this idea of engagement with different communities, and just maybe this next year, just have it be relationship and connection. And if someone, steps up and is interested in providing input or coming to a meeting, great. But I think the more I reflect on those two presentations, I just feel like I'd like to kind of change like the framing we use for it, and that engagement might be a term that's more appropriate in different contexts or around different goals, but that I think I just want to build a relationship or reach out to one or two people and just keep the conversation going for a long time and see what develops from that.
Dana?
I actually love that, Selby, because this past year, we've had we've had two situations, one through wraparound and one through my ISA program, where we've had to do, I'm fortunate enough to have Spanish speaking people on my team, and we have to utilize them even if they're not in that program. And you can really see the difference when you have like local staff versus like a service that you have to engage through an iPad, right? It looks very different for language services. And because of those situations, those programs have grown. Like they've just grown. And so we've had more Spanish speaking families in both of those programs, I think, due to that relationship. And that is, you're right, Selby, that's different than engagement. So I like that reframe for sure.
Yeah, I like it too, because I had just said an engagement and then Selby came in with the response, and then it has me really thinking about words too, and I think about connection as well and the importance of connection. These last 3 learning collaboratives have been so rich, and there's so much to just kind of sit with and think about. And I know I'm doing the same today as I did after those last 2 presentations. And I also rewatched both of them. And like Selby, I think we could just watch them over and over and gain more and more each time. So if you haven't had an opportunity to watch them or just kind of sit with the information, I would encourage you to do so again. Yeah. Any final thoughts as we move forward? Selby, thank you so much for leading us in the presentation today and just guiding us through that and sharing the clips. And then I think if everybody's okay with it, we'll just plan to end a little early today. And I just want to thank everybody for being here for the conversation. And I hope this has been helpful. And I look forward to seeing you all in 2025. I know. All right. Everybody take care. Thank you so much for being here.